Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we would do a change of pace from movies or CDs or books and those things and go through. I am going through all the CDs in my library, but I also have vinyl. I also have LPs, records, as they say, um, in my library. Um, so I thought maybe I'd go through a few of them and maybe go through the whole library over time. This would be episode one. But the main reason why I have this video is a vehicle for a couple of conversations I've had with other people over time, and it's kind of like wondering what you guys thought of some of these things that I'll bring up during this video. All right, so um, let's get to it. It should be some fun. All right, so the first album I got here, anyways, is Dexter Gordon's "Go" from 1962. Not sure. So when I record videos, I'm actually using the face forward camera. I'm not using the selfie camera because it's clear and it's stronger. So I can just see the camera. I can't see the the size of the video or whatever. So I'm hoping when I put this up like this, you see the whole thing. All right. So if not, I'll just have to record everything over again and do it a little bit better. But anyway, so this is the first album that I decided to show you in my collection, and it's "Go" by Dexter Gordon. All right, and it came out in 1962 of his time in New York. All right, so I think he went over to England after this, but just doing a little reading, but uh, of the back of it, right? So basically, this is a new album. I bought this new off Amazon, and this brings up one of the points that I'm trying to bring. Okay, so this is one of the greatest jazz albums of all time. Now, if you enjoy jazz, some people don't. Some people just can't handle listen to music that doesn't have any vocals to it. All right, because it's the vocals that they listen to more than the music. Music is the background for the vocals that they listen to, and they enjoy music with the singer, right? So, but if you actually enjoy listening to the actual musical instruments and not the vocals, jazz is one of the genres that you will probably enjoy, right? So, and this is one of the greats. Now, my favorite type of jazz is if it is going to be vocals, I would like it to be a female vocalist, so rather than a male vocalist. So like I said in previous videos, I would prefer listening to, let's say, Sarah Vaughan rather than, let's say, Mr. Blue Eyes there. Everybody likes to listen to Frank Sinatra, right? So that's just me. I actually like listening to older jazz, but I also like listening to newer jazz with, if it's a female singer, somebody like Molly Johnson. If you haven't heard of her, do some research. She's one of Canada's greatest, jazz vocalists, and everybody's heard of Diana Krall. She's very good as well, right? So, just two of the more modern ones that I listen to. Anyway, so this one came out in 1962. Has no female vocals, but I really like jazz with female vocals, um, or uh, jazz that is led by a saxophone is my favorite non-vocal jazz, right? So Dexter Gordon is one of the big guys when it comes to sax. He plays tenor sax, and on this album here, which is one of the greats, like I said, he even got Sonny Clark on piano, which is another big name. All right, another great jazz pianist, right? So this is, if you like jazz and if you like saxophone-led jazz, you're gonna love this album because this is one of the greats. All right, so um, I bought this new, and so if you notice on it, you see here it says Blue Note audiophile vinyl reissues from the finest in jazz since 1939, mastered from the original analog tapes. Okay, so this is not a 180 gram. This is a regular vinyl. They call it Blue Note ST-84112. All right. So, but basically, this is a remake of the original album from the original tapes. Okay. So, um, I have not opened it. Now, why haven't I opened it and listened to it? I have my record player right over there, right? Okay. So let's talk about those two things right here. The first is the reason why I buy vinyl is because I really like to put them on my wall. So you'll notice in my collection as I go through it, I'll have a lot of great albums. some of the greatest albums of all time. All right, and when I'm going through my CD collection, you'll notice that I point out which I think are the greatest albums of all time. Here's one of them right here. This is one. All right, this is one of the greats in the jazz world, or one of the greats in general, right? So most of the albums that you're going to see, unless they're just personal favorites of mine, are going to be some of the great albums that I think um, deserve me buying in LP format, not necessarily to listen to, but more as an art piece that I can put on my wall. All right. So I prefer when I buy vinyl, I prefer buying new rather than used. If I'm going to buy a used vinyl, I'm going to buy it uh, where the actual jacket um, looks good. It doesn't have any of those rings. Older vinyl, when you store it, pack it together with other vinyl. What happens is they're squished together, and then the actual jacket kind of squishes around the record that's inside it, right? So what you'll end up getting is a ring that goes around, the jacket, right? It looks ugly, right? So I'll avoid those type of. I will buy records used, but the jackets have to be in very good condition so that when I put it up on the wall, all right, when I put it up on the wall, it looks nice, all right. So um, I have albums all through my. I'll do a like a den or a man cave tour at some point or another, and show you everything that I have on the walls or on the shelves or whatever, right? But basically, I have albums all over the walls in my den and in the stairwell going up into the main floor of my house, right? So um, I like the decoration. I like it kind of shows off what type of music you enjoy or what albums you enjoy to others that are around, and maybe they'll end up listening some of the music that you like, or maybe they agree with what you like, right? So basically, the reason why I buy LPs is not to actually play them, although I do. I mean, I do have a record player over there, right? But mostly, how I listen to my music is in my car on a flash drive. So what I'll do is I prefer CDs over LPs. Anybody who argues LPs over CDs, it's a personal preference. I see their point, but basically, CDs are much easier to listen to, and all the music that came out after the CD era um, sounds better. Unfortunately, people argue with me all the time about that, but CD music sounds better than vinyl music. Less cracking, less uh, Now, I understand the argument of how people, when they talk about LPs, they say they sound better because analog sounds better than digital. That little bit of cracking or hiss that you get on a record kind of adds to the atmosphere of the record. It gives a certain feel to it. But I think that's more nostalgia than it is actual, critical analysis of sound, right? I mean, the less distortion and the less. I mean, if you're not purposely distorting, all right. Um, the less distortion you have, the less hiss, the less cracking, the less it just makes the music sound better, and you get that easier on a CD than you do on vinyl, right? So, my opinion, right? Now, depending on how they transfer uh, vinyl onto CD, all right, um, sometimes the vinyl does actually sound better on stuff that's recorded to be put on vinyl, but all the stuff, let's say in the 90s, late 80s and 90s going forward, musicians were using the CD as a basis for their music. So they were, creating that music to be put onto CD, right? So, and that music sounds better. All right. So that's just my opinion. You can argue, leave the comments down below why you think, if you do, you think vinyl sounds better than CDs. I think you're wrong, but you can argue the point, and I'm always open to other people's opinions, right? So that's number one, is the reason why I get this rather than buy it used, is because the cover is like new, and when I put it up on my wall, all right, it looks really nice, all right. A damaged cover doesn't look as nice if you're using it as wall art, right? Okay, so that's the number one thing is the main purpose of the reason why I collect vinyl. Um, so another thing that brings up is okay. So let's say I go search for this like in its original pressing back in 1962, and you can find it. Discogs is a good place to find a lot of LP music and that, right? But you can search around and you can find it. What I what I see is those are more collector pieces than actual music. All right, so I mean it's like it's similar to collecting, let's say, sports cards or something like that. But there's actual a use for a record. You can play it and listen to the music that's on it, whereas you can't do that with a sports card. But people are treating like older LPs like they do sports cards, where it's they want to have a record library that they never play. I understand the point of that. You can hang the piece like a piece of art on your wall, right? And I guess you could put on it saying this is the original pressing from 1962, just to impress your friends, maybe. I'm not sure, but what what I personally enjoy about collecting LPs and putting them on the wall is if they look new or not, and that way it shows off the album nicely rather than a damaged album. So, and okay, so let's get into that. Okay, so let's say I can buy this new, or let's say I can buy it used. If you can imagine that there's a used copy of this in my other hand, right? So I could buy this one new, and I think I bought this one for 24.99. Okay, and this used one, depending on which pressing it is, all right, because some pressings are better than others. If they repress something, are they repressing it from the original tapes, or they are pressing it from another pressing, or what, right? So audiophiles will look for the best sounding pressing of the album. But if you're going back to its original pressing of, let's say, this album or a Beatles album or a Rolling Stones album, those things are valued and well sought after, right? So you're going to be paying a premium for it. But what you're going to buy is the actual record, all right? So you're going to buy it. Let's say you get an original pressing, maybe you're paying $100 for it instead of, let's say, 24.99 or $20 or whatever for this one, right? So um, I don't understand that reasoning. Okay? I don't understand the reasoning where if you could get this one, all right, new, all right, pressed from the analog tapes, all right, the original analog tapes, and supposedly it's supposed to sound very, very good. I haven't listened to it, but okay. Um, or you can get the original, which is like 50 years old, all right. It's not going to sound as good, all right, because the person who first bought that album did not hermetically seal it somewhere and not use it at all. They used it and they played it. And if they enjoyed it, they played it a lot. All right. So when you play that album, it's not going to sound very good. It's not going to sound as good as this one more times than not. Okay. So you're going to spend four times the amount. I don't know. Look it up on Discogs what an original Go album costs or whatever. It could be more, it could be less. I don't know, but I know it's going to be a pretty good amount of money because this is one of the great albums, right? So um, you pay more for something that's sounding inferior than this would, and it looks worse as well because you know the jacket's going to be it's been around for 50 years. It's going to dry it out. It's probably going to be scratched or damaged in some way in the corners, especially from people putting it in and out of their collection or flipping it back and forth. It's going to be bent or whatever, right? Um, so even if you do find a really nice one, you're going to pay even a higher premium for that one, right? Um, uh, and then you play it. Now you have the prestige of having an original printing of that album that you can impress your friends with or whatever, right? Um, but for sound, it's not going to sound as good, right? And if you get a really good CD recording of this album, all right, um, it's going to sound even better than this album, right? Um, so so why would you buy this one? All right. The only thing I can buy it understand is the same motivation that people will buy a sports card, right? But with a sports card, you're not actually using it. You're gonna, you know, protected in plastic, and it's almost like it's kind of an investment for you. Um, you're going to flip through them, and oh, I got this card, I got this card, this is a cool card, this is a cool card, whatever, that kind of thing. Same thing, I guess, you could do with albums, but the point of an album is to actually play it and listen to it, right? Now, I don't really do that. I use them as wall art, but um, I don't understand the increased price of something that's older that's going to play like crap. It's going to sound worse, all right? Because of time and age, all right? Or if you buy it just to have it in your collection and you're never going to play it and you're not using it as wall art, you're just using it as a collector piece, right? Um, I don't really understand that very much. And I'm a serious collector, right? So I don't collect seriously LPs. I'm not going to spend $100 on an LP just because it's original pressing. I would prefer to get it onto CD so I can transfer it and listen to it in my car. All right. Now, the argument for vinyl over CDs, all right, is, and this is the best argument that I've ever heard for LPs over CDs, and that is with a CD, all right. I mean, not that anybody uses them anymore, but you can actually extrapolate that to actually streaming now as well, all right. So let's say you use a streaming service similar to a CD. Like people used to have CD players that you could put in, let's say 6, 10. I mean, some of them even went up to like 30 or 40 CDs you put in, and you can just press play, and then they'll play one CD after the other CD after the other CD. You don't have to go back to it, right? That's the reason why CDs became popular, is the sound was better, at least to most people, um, and you can put the album. Uh, you can put the CD in the CD player and play it, and it'll play all the way through. You don't have to go back to the CD player and have it flip it over to the other side. So, in other words, you're listening to a CD in full 40 to 60 minutes or whatever, um, rather than listening to 20 minutes, having to go back to the record player and flip the record player over. All right. Um, because it's a pain in the rear. All right. So the big argument uh, for record lovers is they like, the tactile feel of the albums. They like to use the record player, and they know that when they're going to play music on record, they have to actually concentrate on the music. They can't go do other things, right? So music doesn't go into the background like perhaps a CD will. If you're, let's say, you put a CD on, or you put on Spotify or iTunes or whatever, and you listen to music, you put it in the background, then you go do other things, right? If you're playing music on a record player, you have to actually concentrate on that music, all right? So you're going to sit there, you're going to listen to the music, because if, even if you get distracted from that music, you're going to get pulled back to that music within 20, 25 minutes, because you're going to have to flip the record, right? So it kind of forces you to actually listen to the music and have that as your main purpose of the main thing that's occupying your time at that time, right? So um, I understand that point. When you listen to vinyl, you're listening to the music more than if you were listening to it on Spotify or on a CD, right? So I understand that point, and yeah, that's probably the best argument that I've heard, is that it kind of forces you to actually listen to that music, because you just don't have time to do anything else um, except listen to that music. So what you'll have is people will sit down with their record collection, pull out a few records, and they'll spend time actually listening to the music rather than, oh, I'm going to put a CD on, or stream on Spotify, and then I'm going to go do my homework, or I'm going to go, you know, do some paperwork that I have to do, or clean the house or whatever, right? So you're actually concentrating on that actual music. That is the only argument that I found that has a lot of merit. Any of the other ones where they say that LPs sound better than CDs, yeah, I don't see it. And if there is a difference, that difference um, doesn't overweigh having to go back to your um, record player to flip it every 20 minutes, right? If you're listening to music not to concentrate on the music, to put it because you're doing housework, or whatever you're doing your homework or whatever, and you want music in the background, a record player is not something that is conducive to that type of behavior, right? And So the streaming service would probably be the best way for that, right? But I like CDs transferring them digitally onto a flash drive, listening to them in my car. But anyway, so that's the argument. But here's another point of what I'm saying. People wholeheartedly went over to CD from LP. I mean, like in a big way. And there was a nostalgic feel like 20 years after, let's say in the 90s or the 2000s, where people started going back to vinyl because of the nostalgia factor. It's like the same reason why people will pick up, let's say, uh, a Super Nintendo and play those games that they played when they were younger, right? Even though games have come such a long way since, let's say, the Super Nintendo or Super Mario 3, which was one of my favorite, well, one of my roommate's favorite games that he would play all the time, right? Um, so there's that nostalgia feel to it, right? But otherwise, CDs. I mean, even when you go back, okay, I grew up in the vinyl era, all right? And what we would do, there was two things that we would do. I mean, everybody that I knew that listened to records, I mean, now remember, CDs didn't come out yet. This is like late 70s, early 80s, okay? And people were buying vinyl. The first vinyl record I ever bought was Pink Floyd The Wall, all right? And I would bring it home and I would play it on the record player. Now, the record player that I had that big, center piece of metal, and you could put multiple records, balancing them on top of it. And that invention was created because people didn't want to go back to their record player every 20 minutes to flip it over. So what you could do is if you had a record library, you could stack, let's say, 4 or 5 records on the top of this, record player, and they would drop, play, the the arm would play the whole thing, then it would raise up, go back to its start, and then another record would drop, and then it would go back and put it down, right? Okay, so even back then, people didn't want to go back to their record players. I mean, you did have the high end enthusiasts that had a turntable, not a record player. They had a turntable that they would use, and they would have to go back every 20 minutes to flip it over, right? This high end equipment, turntables were the elitist type of listening, right? So, at least in my recollection, at our house we had a record player that had a center metal piece that you could put multiple records on. And what I did was I actually went back to the record store, all right, and I bought a second copy of Pink Floyd The Wall. Now it came with 2 LPs, and what I did was I would put it on side one, and then I would take um, the second LP that I bought and take the record of that one, flip it over to side two, and then put side three, and then take the other record and put it on side four. So I'd actually have a double copy of a lot of the albums that I had, so that I could put on one side, side A, and then take the second record, which is basically the same copy, flip that over, put it on side B, and that way I could play both sides at once. I wouldn't have to go back to the record player. But what happened in the early '80s was cassette tapes also started being put out because Sony created what was called a Walkman, which was something about this square that you would plug in earphones to, and you could put a cassette tape in, press play, all right, ran on batteries, and you could walk around listening to your music, right? It was a portable, uh, the first portable way to listen to music, like outside your car, maybe you're on the bus, maybe you're walking around, whatever, right? So that was cool. You didn't have to carry a huge boom box around with you um, to play your tapes or whatever, right? So you could actually, Sony created that Walkman, right? Um, but what would happen with that is like I said, you listen to 20 minutes and you'd flip the cassette over because it was the same as the LP, right? You'd have a side A and a side B on the cassette, and you'd flip it over and play again, right? And you couldn't trek around a whole bunch of cassettes, even just like you couldn't trek around with a whole bunch of records, right? Um, so you'd have a few of them. So the behavior was you'd be listening to one album over and over and over and over again for the whole day, right? And when you got bored of it, if you did, then a lot of the Walkmans had a radio on it as well, and you just listen to the radio with your Walkman, right? But anyway, but what that did was it started an industry where you had blank tapes that were 90 minutes long. All right. So you could get 45 minutes on each side of this blank tape. So you could actually, most records were within the 40 to 45-minute range. So you could actually put both sides A and side B. You just buy this stereo that had a record player on it and a cassette player, and you could record from the record player to the cassette. So you go buy a blank tape and you would record um, the whole side A and side B album on one side of that tape, flip it over, take a second record and put a second record on that and keep that tape. That way you could walk around with your Walkman and listen to two albums on one cassette tape, right? And it got to the point where people would um, buy the records and buy the 90-minute cassette tapes and just take the record and record it on one side and then just play the cassette tape, because all you do is you put it in, you press play, and then you just leave it and it'll play the whole album. You don't have to go back and flip the record over, right? So even back during the time of records where LPs were bought, people were avoiding trying to play the records. They would buy double records in order to play side A and side B on the record player without having to go back and flip it over. They would buy cassettes to record the whole album on one side of a 90-minute cassette so that they could play the whole album without going back to the record player. So people were avoiding playing records even back, in the early 80s, right? So, and then when the CD came out, people wholeheartedly left LPs and went into the CDs. Number one, because of their convenience, you get to hear the whole album without having to go back and flip a record, right? And you could buy CD players that you could put multiple CDs in, right? So um, when it came to the portable side of it, though, a lot of the problems with the CDs didn't translate well into to jumping from a cassette tape, because these CD players that the Walkmans for the CDs would skip all the time once you hit like you hit, the bus would hit a pothole or something, and the disc would disengage from the laser or whatever, and it would skip or whatever, right? So the cassettes were actually still better than the actual CDs to walk around with until they got that technology done correctly. But anyway, so I'm talking about other things other than LPs, but basically what I'm trying to say to you is that um, people that argue that vinyl sounds better than CDs, wholeheartedly, most people left vinyl in the rear view when CDs came out. Now, you had that, oh, this is the newest thing, it's so great or whatever. And you had other people that tried it and they got turned off from the CDs, because the original CDs, back in the mid 80s, the original, especially the transfers from LP to CD, some of them sounded flat. They didn't have the technology perfected like they did later on in the late 80s, after, like, let's say 86, 87 or whatever, the technology um, was fine tuned to make the sound better, right? So anyway, um, I just don't agree with anybody who says that LPs sound better than CDs. Uh, I just don't agree with you. Maybe you can convince me. I'm not sure. I do understand the having to sit and listen to the record and concentrate on the music, what that turntable will do to your behavior. I understand that point, right? Because I still do occasionally, nostalgically, I will pull out my record player, which is on my shelf here, and listen to music, especially the albums that are very difficult to find on CD because they were put out during the vinyl era and then they weren't popular enough to, let's say, merit a CD transfer. Um, so the more obscure, and being in Canada, there's a lot of it because a lot of Canadian music, if it was repressed onto a CD, there wasn't very many copies of it made. So a lot of the pre '80s Canadian music is easier to find on LP than it is on CD, right? So anyway, so that's Dexter Gordon's Go. All right, now we'll move up to the next album that I found, and this one I got used. All right, and this is David Bowie's Station to Station, one of his best albums. This is his 10th album. Came out in 1976. Yeah, 1976. This is a used, but as you notice, see the cover, it looks really nice. So this I wouldn't mind putting in a frame and putting it up on my wall. I just have other albums up right now. So when I get the urge to switch out albums from the frames that I have up on the wall, I have albums here that I can put up instead. This is one of the greatest albums of all time. A lot of David Bowie's music is that way. This one, Aladdin Sane, but probably my favorite and the one that I think is his greatest is, Ziggy Stardust is probably his best from '72. This came out in '76. This is his 10th album. I think uh, his fifth album was Ziggy Stardust. This one has Golden Years on it and TBC 15. I just got a piece of dust in my eye. And Station to Station. That intro to the album, Station to Station, that intro is really cool. I mean, it grabs a hold of you at the beginning of this album. It grabs a hold of you, and then you kind of listen to the whole album after that, and it's really good. So that's Station to Station from David Bowie, one of the great albums of all time. And here's another one, another great album all time from 1969. It's Led Zeppelin's first album. All right, do I really have to go into Led Zeppelin? Everybody knows Led Zeppelin, right? And this basically is a 180 gram vinyl edition of it, right? So I bought this for like 20 bucks. So I bought this. I can put it up on my wall. I haven't opened it yet. It's still in its original shrink wrap, right? Um, it's on 180 gram vinyl, which leads to another thing. Okay, so this is the album that has Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, and all the great songs before Led Zeppelin 4. The first four Led Zeppelin albums are all classic. My personal Led Zeppelin album favorite is Led Zeppelin 2. That was my all-time favorite Led Zeppelin song, which is Ramble On. Um, and But you can't go wrong with Led Zeppelin. And you can basically put pretty much all of their albums, other than maybe Coda, up in the top albums of all time, right? So uh, on 180 gram vinyl. Now, what's the difference between regular vinyl? Let's say around 120 grams, I think, 110 grams. They all weigh a bit differently. Or 180 gram vinyl. There's sound wise there is no difference. All right, at least that I could hear. What it does do is gives you a little bit of confidence to buy the record because it's thicker, right? And when it's thicker, it'll warp less. It has less time to, you know, you ever put a record on your turntable on your record player, and you put the needle down on it, and then you see the arm of the needle going, because the record is warped, right? Um, Argumentatively, 180 gram, it's a thicker record, so it will warp less. But the actual, grooves in the record and the actual playing of the record, um, there's no difference. It doesn't sound any better. It's just that it'll last longer and it'll warp less. Is basically at least the marketing of why 180 gram vinyl is better than, let's say, 120 gram vinyl. All right. So that's Led Zeppelin 1 that came out in 1969. Another one of my all-time favorite albums is Leonard Cohen's third album. I think, yeah, his third album came out in 1971, and it's called Songs of Love and Hate. If you want to collect Leonard Cohen, this is one of the albums you should do. First four or five albums, from the '70s or whatever, are probably his best work, and then you jump into the '80s and get "I'm Your Man." I'm Your Man. Yeah. Um, but this one has probably my all-time favorite song of his, and that's "Famous Blue Raincoat." And that one, I would argue, is probably I would argue is the greatest song of all time, lyric-wise, and it's one of the most depressing songs of all time. It's just an emotional song of the nth degree. I mean, just listen to it. Go on YouTube or Spotify, play "Famous Blue Raincoat" if you haven't heard it, and tell me you just didn't listen to one of the greatest songs of all time. And it has others like "Love Calls You by Names." The Joan of Arc song is very good on this one as well. Um, so Leonard Cohen's one of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time, Canadian or not Canadian. And so many people have covered so many of his songs. Hallelujah, all anyway. So that's Leonard Cohen's songs of love and hate. Next up is Know What I Mean, Cannibal Adderley's album from 1962 with Bill Evans on it. I don't know much about this one. I just know that Cannonball Adderley is was lacking in my collection, and when I came across this on Amazon, they had it for less than I think it was $15. And I went, cool. So every once in a while, when the price and the opportunity, all the planets align and everything, I'll pick up an album, an LP that I haven't listened to before, and I'll listen to it because I haven't seen this one on CD, right? So I came across it on LP, and I have a bit of Cannonball Adderley in my collection, my jazz collection, but not a lot. And then when this one was on sale on Amazon, I picked it up. So once I listen to it, I'll let you know what it's like. And it's also one of the jazz classics, audio files, 180 gram, done with the anyways, all the stuff that they try to sell vinyl with nowadays. Next up is one of the more recent albums in my collection. I don't have a lot of music past 2010. All right, and I have very few vinyl of that time as well because, like I said, I prefer the CD over the vinyl. Right. So, but I listened to this album. It was recommended to me. I went on Spotify and I listened to the album. I was blown away by it. It's the type of country that I really enjoy. It's a country album. It's the type of country that I really enjoy. Um, and he's a young guy. He's from like Kentucky or wherever he is from. And it's like bluegrass with a bit of folk and everything. And it's called Purgatory. All right. And it came out in 2017. And it is by Tyler Childers. All right. And if you haven't listened to this album, do yourself a favor and pick this up. This is going to go on my wall once I switch it over because, great country albums are few and far between once country kind of turned pop, if you know what I mean, when it turned into pop country back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, with Garth Brooks and Shania Twain and these guys that kind of put a pop spin on country music, right? All right, so that's Purgatory by Tyler Childers. Um, Next up is one of the Beatles albums from 1966. It's their seventh, all right, and this is the first original pressing of it. Um, and I got it from my local record store that I like to go to, and I decided I didn't have any. I want to put this up on the wall. All right. It's not my favorite Beatles album. Probably my second favorite Beatles album. My favorite Beatles album would be probably Sergeant Pepper. But this is kind of the start of their psychedelic era. It's Revolver. All right. And it has Taxman, Eleanor Rigby, Yellow Submarine, Good Day Sunshine, and so on and so forth. So this is obviously one of the greatest albums of all time. It could be argued that this is the greatest album of all time. All right, I wouldn't put that there. My argument would be for Pink Floyd The Wall, um, but a lot of people have argued that this album is the greatest album of all time. So if you have not listened to it, you were in a cave for the last 50 years. Pick it up and listen to it. It's a great album. All right, so first Canadian pressing, I paid like $40 for that album. Don't know why. I had extra money on me at the time. All right. Next album is one of the greatest hip hop albums of all time. All right. And it's Illmatic by Nas. Came out in 1994. Um, I think you'll have a very difficult time finding anybody better. You may find many that are equal, but anybody better than Nas when it comes to rapping, the flow, uh, the lyrical prowess of what he's singing. Now, can I relate to what he's singing? In a way, I wasn't rich growing up. I wasn't even middle class until I ended up moving in with my dad when I was in my early double numbers. But growing up, most of the time growing up, I was dirt poor, right? Um, so I understand the poor of this, but the rest of it is, it put New York back on the map is what it did because rap kind of left New York and went over to the West Coast all the gangster rap of the West Coast in the 90s, right? Well, this one kind of grabbed rap by the neck and brought it back to New York in a way. And everybody listened to this album. This was such a good album. If you haven't listened to this album, then your knowledge of hip hop is lacking, right? Now I'm no expert at hip hop, but I know this album just listening to Nas spit, as they say, um, is quite pleasurable. Even though a lot of the stuff that he's singing about on this album, I I can't really relate to because I'm not American. I'm not African American. I didn't grow up in New York. He grew up in Queens, in the Queensbridge projects, and this is a lot about what he's singing about here. But I do know what poor is, and uh, and I do know talent when I see it. And this album, one of the great rap or even just regular albums of all time, right? So, all right, so that's Nas's Illmatic. Next up is my argument for the greatest metal album of all time, and that's Metallica's Master of Puppets. I would put this probably behind The Wall as my second favorite album, probably, um, give or take. Uh, it's in the top 10 anyways, and it's a stunning album. And if you like, like fast speed music, hard rock, metal music, then this is their best album. This is before they did the Enter Sandmans and the Black Album, where they kind of relaxed everything for radio. And this one is pure adrenaline, basically. And basically, it even has a theme. It's like a concept album about losing control over your own life, how outside powers can take over your life, and there's nothing you can really do about it. So you'll have, for example, let's say, uh, Master of Puppets. That song is about drug addiction, all right, and how drug addiction can take over your life, all right. Um, Welcome Home Sanitarium. That's about a mental institution that basically takes over your life. Okay. Total institutions are basically that way. They basically take over your everyday life. You have no choice in the matter, right? So, Disposable Heroes. That's obviously about the military. Another total institution that takes over your life, where it takes away your choice, right? Um, Leper Messiah is about religion and how people blindly follow um, a religious cults, all right, which also take over your life, right? And others on this album. Anyways, it's just you'll get like really fast pounding type of music, um, and then every few songs you'll get like a like an instrumental that kind of slows things down, and then after that instrumental, you'll get a pounding doo, 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 again. It's an extremely fun ride listening to this album. If you haven't listened to this album and you like hard rock, heavy metal music, you should listen to this album. Now I know there's a lot of naysayers think that Metallica isn't the greatest, metal band of all time. I understand that point. They're kind of hit and miss, but their early stuff, Kill 'Em All, this one is some really good heavy metal. All right, and this is my argument of the greatest metal album of all time. All right. All right, so next up after this is the Bloody Hollies, and this is Fire at Will, came out in 2003. All right, now I came across the Bloody Hollies, which is a band. They're like a garage band out of I think it's Buffalo. I think they're from Buffalo. I came about If Footmen Tire You is which is their this I think this is their second, and If Footmen Tire You is their third, and I bought on CD If Footmen Tire You, and I was blown away by it. Um, this was a time when the White Stripes were very large, um, and these guys kind of sound a bit like the White Stripes, but they're a full band. They're not just two people, right? And they really kick it like I don't know. You'll have to listen to them, but if you like garage punk music, uh, this band you should check out. All right, and it's called the Bloody Hollies, and this album is called Fire at Will. I found it used for $15, and it's really difficult in Canada to find the Bloody Hollies, so I grabbed that right away. All right. Next up is a album from 1982 from one of the the British invasion uh, of heavy metal back in the early 80s, Judas Priest. This is their sixth album, no, eighth album. This is their eighth album, Screaming for Vengeance. All right, and it's probably, well, they had British Steel that came out before this in 1980. This one came out in 1982, and those were the two albums that put them on the map when it came to popularity or recognition. I mean, they were playing music in the 70s, but nobody grabbed a hold of them until they did British Steel, and they came over with the new wave of British heavy metal with bands like this, Iron Maiden, and those guys, right? They came over from Britain to the United States or whatever, right? So this one has probably their most famous song on it, which was what? "You Got Another Thing Coming." Remember that? And one of the all-time great albums, one of the all-time great metal albums. All right, "Screaming for Vengeance." All right. So next up is a jazz album. Came out in 1955. And it's called "Count Basie Swings and Joe Williams Sings." All right. Now this is I think Joe Williams' first like guest lead on an album, and Count Basie's been around for years, probably over 20 years by the time this came out. When did this come out? Yeah, 55. He was back in the 30s. So I think this is, well, you can just tell he's not young in this album, right? So I don't know a lot. I know this album on reputation, and when I found it for like $12 at my local record store, I went, cool. I have this on CD, but I haven't listened to it yet. So I figured I'd pick it up on vinyl and add to my jazz collection on the wall. All right. All right. So that's Count Basie Swings, Joe Williams Sings. Next up is one of the greatest live albums of all time in the rock genre. You have, there's a few live albums that are great, but this is one that you should add to that top live albums, and that's "Live at Leeds" by The Who. It's their first live album, and it's the only live album that they had um, while they were still playing, right? I mean, there was other live albums where they would go back. This came out in 1970, and I found it for $8 used. And look at the cover. Cover's in still in pretty much almost perfect condition, right? So it'll look good on the wall. All right. I have this on actual CD, so I've listened to it numerous times. If you like live albums, that's one that you should check out if you haven't heard, because it's one of the great live albums of all time. And last but not least is an album that I have not listened to, and I know the band from Reputation, kind of like a psychedelic rock band from the 60s. They're called Vanilla Fudge. All right. And this is what? This is their fifth album and last album with their original lineup. I think they broke up in 1970. They played in the mid 60s till 1970. They broke up. I think they got back together a few times with different lineups, but the original lineup, these guys, they put out 5 albums, and they're not easy to find. Let's put it that way. All right. So when I came across this one for $12 at my local record store, I said, "All right, I've heard for decades about Vanilla Fudge. I've just never been able to hear them, and so I can't find them on CD. So when I found this vinyl album for a reasonable price, I decided to pick it up. Now, is it an original pressing? It's pressed in Canada, and it's got that hole punch to it, so it looks like it was a remainder. It's got a hole punch on it, right? Um, so, but I'm looking forward to hearing it when I get the urge to actually pull out my record player and listen to some records, right? So that's Rock and Roll. That's their last album together as an original group. All right, and it's supposed to be a pretty good album. So, but all their music is supposed to be pretty good. So, all right. So that's some of my record collection. I have more, uh, but I thought I'd leave it to that. The main the main point of this wasn't actually to show my record collection. It was to talk about CDs versus vinyl. 180-gram vinyl, whether it's better than regular vinyl, which it isn't. Okay, it's just it'll last longer, at least um, what I think. I mean, just logically speaking, a thicker um, vinyl record will warp less and then get damaged less because it'll warp less, right? So anyway, so that's some of my albums. I hope you enjoyed the video, and leave a thumbs up if you found it enjoyable. Subscribe if you so choose. I would like you to, and if you like this, leave a comment below. What do you think of the bands that I just showed you? Some of the greatest albums of all time, which is basically what I collect in LP. I don't really go crazy, except for Canadian music. It's easier to find Canadian music sometimes on LP than it is on CD. So I do have a bit of a Canadian record collection just because I like listening to that music and I can't find it on CD, right? So anyway, so that's the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next one. There's going to be more episodes of my record albums, but most of them you'll see are new, because I prefer buying new over used, just because the album covers are nicer, and usually the record plays better as well, depending on where the source of the music is from that they pressed onto the record. But because my main purpose for buying LPs is to display them as wall art, it shows my personality off on the walls. When people come over, they say, "Oh, you like that album too? Oh, you like that album, right?" And it looks nicer when it's new than it does uh, on an LP maybe that was put out 50 years ago or something, or 40 years ago, and it's been wrecked over time, right? So, all right. So, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Maybe it'll be episode 2 of my vinyl collection. Either way, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Bye for now.